The world does not need to know everything about you. In fact, the moment you reveal every intention, every plan, every fear, and every weakness, you give people information they can use to predict you. Most people call complete transparency honesty. Strategic intelligence understands something different. Honesty does not require unlimited access. Calculated opacity means revealing what is necessary while keeping the rest private. It is not lying. It is not deception. It is the discipline of deciding what people need to know, when they need to know it, and whether they have earned the right to know it. Imagine someone asks what you are planning next. Most people immediately explain everything: the goal, the strategy, the problems, the timeline, even the fears behind it. They believe more information creates trust. But now the other person knows your direction, your constraints, and possibly what you are afraid of losing. You have made yourself predictable. A more strategic response may simply communicate what is necessary and leave the rest unsaid. Not to create artificial mystery, but to maintain control over your own information. Because information is a form of leverage. Once something is revealed, you cannot make another person unknow it. Your plans can be criticized before they are ready. Your weaknesses can be remembered. Your priorities can become negotiating tools. Your private intentions can become public expectations. That is why intelligent people do not reveal everything simply because someone asks. They understand that access should have levels. A stranger does not need the same information as a friend. A colleague does not need the same information as a trusted partner. A competitor certainly does not need the same information as someone working directly with you. This does not make you fake, it makes you selective. The same principle applies to your plans. One of the easiest ways to weaken a goal is to announce it before you have built anything. Suddenly, everyone has an opinion. You begin defending an idea that should have been receiving your attention. Instead of building, you start managing other people's expectations. Sometimes the smartest strategy is simple. Build first, explain later. Let the result create the explanation. There is also a psychological reason selective disclosure creates influence. When people do not have the complete picture, curiosity fills the gaps. They pay closer attention to what you actually choose to reveal. But do not turn this into a performance. Constantly acting mysterious makes you look insecure, not intelligent. The goal is not to make people wonder about you. The goal is to remain in control of your narrative. Speak when speaking serves the situation. Remain silent when disclosure gives away something unnecessary. Share personal information gradually as trust develops. Keep sensitive plans private until revealing them has a purpose. Even your weaknesses require judgment. Vulnerability can strengthen a genuine relationship, but exposing every insecurity to everyone gives the wrong people a map of where you can be pressured. You should not live behind a mask. You should live behind boundaries. There is a major difference. A mask hides who you are. A boundary decides who gets access to which parts of you. That distinction keeps calculated, opacity, ethical. You are not creating false stories. You are simply refusing to turn your entire life into public property. Before revealing something, ask yourself, does this need to be known? Does this person need to know it? Is this the right time to reveal it? If yes, speak. If not, keep it. Your information is a resource. Do not spend it simply because someone is curious. And when you become selective with your words, something else changes. People begin paying more attention when you actually speak. Your words become less frequent, but more deliberate. Your silence stops looking like hesitation and starts looking like control. That is the first lesson of strategic intelligence. You do not need to hide everything. You simply need to stop revealing everything. But knowing what to reveal is only half the skill. The next question is even more important. Can you change the way you communicate without changing who you are? Because the smartest person is not always the one with the best message. Sometimes it is the one who knows exactly how to deliver that message to the person standing in front of him. The person who communicates the same way with everyone eventually discovers a simple problem. People do not think the same way, value the same things, or process information in the same way. Strategic intelligence is not about forcing everyone to understand you. It is about understanding how the person in front of you receives information, then adapting your expression without abandoning your principles. You already do this naturally. You speak differently to a close friend than to a stranger. You behave differently in a job interview than at a party. The difference is that most people adapt unconsciously. An intelligent person makes the adaptation deliberate. If someone is analytical, give them facts. If they are practical, show them how something works. If they care about the bigger picture, explain the destination before the details. If emotion matters to them, acknowledge the emotion before presenting the solution. The message does not have to change. The delivery changes. Think of water. It takes the shape of the container without becoming something other than water. Your communication should work the same way. You can change your tone, examples, level of detail, and approach while keeping your core identity intact. This matters because communication is not about expressing yourself perfectly. It is about creating understanding. Imagine a manager explaining a new process to two employees. One wants numbers, structure, and evidence. The other wants to know how the change will affect the team and why it matters. Giving both people the exact same explanation may be efficient for the speaker, but ineffective for the audience. A strategic communicator notices the difference. This is not manipulation when the purpose is genuine understanding. It becomes manipulation when you pretend to share values you do not have simply to control someone. That distinction matters. Adapt your presentation, not your integrity. Your principles should remain stable. Your behavior can become flexible. This makes you more effective in negotiations, leadership, sales, and relationships because you stop demanding that everyone communicate on your preferred terms. Instead, you learn the language of the person in front of you, and people respond to being understood. When someone feels that you understand how they think, they become more receptive. The conversation becomes easier. Resistance decreases. You spend less time forcing your point and more time creating a bridge between your perspective and theirs. But there is a danger. If you adapt too much, you can lose yourself. You begin changing opinions simply to fit the room. You agree with whoever is speaking. You become whatever another person wants you to be. That is not adaptive intelligence. That is dependence. The strongest version of adaptive persona has two layers, a flexible exterior and a stable core. Your tone can change. Your strategy can change. Your language can change. Your principles should not. This is especially important when dealing with people who have very different personalities. You do not need to win every person through the same approach. Some respond to logic, others respond to vision. Some need directness, others need context. Your job is not to complain that they communicate differently. Your job is to understand the difference. Once you develop this skill, you become harder to misunderstand and easier to work with. You stop wasting energy, proving that your communication style is the correct one. You become capable of moving between different environments without losing your center. That is the real power of adaptation. Change the shape, not the substance. And there is a deeper reason this skill matters. The more effectively you adapt, the less dependent you become on one specific person, one environment, or one way of being understood. You can walk into different rooms and remain yourself, but there is another kind of freedom you need before you can truly become strategically intelligent. Freedom from attachment. Because even the smartest person becomes predictable when they are terrified of losing something. What you cannot bear to lose can eventually become the thing that controls you. The person who fears losing everything can be controlled by almost anyone who knows what to threaten. Lose the job, lose the relationship, lose the approval, lose the opportunity. Fear turns each possibility into a leash. Detachment breaks the leash. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or careless. It means caring without becoming dependent on the outcome. You can want something deeply without believing your life will collapse if you do not get it. Consider two people negotiating a business deal. Person A desperately needs the agreement. He has already built his plans around it, so walking away feels impossible. Person B wants the deal, but has alternatives. If the terms become unreasonable, person B can leave. Who has more power? The second person, not because he is smarter, because he is less attached. When you cannot walk away, the other side knows it. Your desperation changes your decisions. You accept terms you would normally reject. You compromise too quickly. You become afraid to say no. Detachment restores your ability to choose. The same principle applies to relationships. If you are terrified of being alone, you may tolerate behavior you would never accept if you knew you could walk away. If you need someone's approval, you may tell them what they want to hear. If you are terrified of losing a position, you may remain silent when you should speak. The fear of loss becomes the hidden decision maker. This is why the less desperate you become, the clearer you think. You can still care about your career without allowing one job to define your worth. You can love someone without believing you cannot survive without them. You can pursue a goal without allowing failure to destroy your identity. Care deeply, depend lightly. That is the balance. Detachment also changes how you handle disagreement. If you are desperate to be right, you stop listening. You defend your position because losing the argument feels like losing status. But when being right is no longer the priority, you can examine information objectively. You can change your mind when the evidence changes. That is strength, not weakness. A person who cannot change their position because their ego is attached to it is not powerful. They are trapped by their own need to be right. The same thing happens with approval. If everyone must like you, you cannot make difficult decisions. Someone will always be disappointed. Someone will always disagree. Someone will always misunderstand your choice. If their reaction determines your decision, they are effectively making the decision for you. Detachment gives you room to disappoint people when necessary. It also protects you from manipulation. A threat only works when the threatened outcome has enough power over you. If someone says, "Do this or I will leave," and you know you can survive their departure, the threat loses much of its force. You may still prefer that they stay, but preference is not dependence. That distinction is crucial. The goal is not to become someone who has nothing to lose. It is to become someone who refuses to sacrifice everything simply because they fear losing one thing. Build alternatives. Develop your skills so one job does not define your future. Strengthen yourself so one rejection does not destroy your confidence. Maintain your own life so one relationship does not become your entire identity. Create options so desperation has less room to operate. You do not need to abandon what you love. You need to stop making it your only source of security. Start small. Practice not needing to win every argument. Practice being comfortable when someone disagrees. Practice walking away from a bad deal. Practice saying no without immediately explaining yourself. Practice accepting that some people will not approve of your choices. Each time you survive the loss you feared, you become less controllable. And something interesting happens. You often become more attractive to the very things you were afraid of losing. The negotiator who can walk away negotiates from strength. The person who does not desperately need approval appears more confident. The person who is comfortable alone chooses relationships more carefully. The person who can accept failure takes bigger, smarter risks. Detachment does not make you care less. It makes your care impossible to weaponize. That is the real freedom. But freedom from attachment creates another advantage. Once you stop chasing outcomes desperately, you can begin influencing situations without forcing them. You no longer need to demand attention. You build value. You no longer need to demand respect. You become useful. You no longer need to force people to follow your direction. You create conditions where your influence becomes natural. And that leads to the next lesson: silent leverage. The strongest influence is often the influence nobody feels being applied. You do not need to pressure someone into choosing what you want. You create enough value, credibility, or strategic advantage that your position becomes difficult to ignore. That is silent leverage. Most people try to create influence by demanding it. They speak louder, push harder, remind others of their authority, or constantly prove how important they are. But pressure creates resistance. The harder you force someone, the more they look for a way to escape. Leverage works differently. Instead of asking, "How can I make them do this?" ask, "What can I build that changes their incentives?" Imagine two employees asking for a promotion. One repeatedly tells the manager how hard he works and how much he deserves recognition. The other quietly develops a skill the team desperately needs, solves problems nobody else can solve, and becomes reliable when important situations arise. The second person may say less, but his position speaks louder. That is leverage. It comes from having something valuable enough that people must consider it. Expertise, information, trust, results, alternatives, relationships, reputation, resources. The more genuine value you possess, the less you need to force recognition. This is why strategic people invest in becoming difficult to replace, rather than constantly demanding to be appreciated. If your influence depends entirely on your title, it disappears when the title disappears. If it depends on your ability to create results, it travels with you. Build something people need. Then you will not have to beg them to listen. The same principle applies to negotiations. You do not gain leverage simply by talking about how strong your position is. You gain it by having alternatives. If one deal is your only option, you negotiate from dependence. If you have 3 viable alternatives, your behavior changes automatically. You can say no, and meaningfully saying no is one of the clearest forms of leverage. But leverage is not always visible. Sometimes it is information, sometimes it is timing, sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is simply knowing that you do not have to respond immediately. A person who rushes gives away information. A person who can wait gathers it, while others reveal their intentions through urgency. You can observe what they actually need. Their pressure becomes information. Their impatience becomes information. Their willingness to compromise becomes information. You do not need to exploit every weakness you discover. You simply need to understand the situation better before deciding. This is where silent leverage connects to detachment. If you desperately need a specific outcome, your leverage decreases. If you have alternatives, you can wait. If you can walk away, you can negotiate. If you do not need immediate approval, you can make decisions based on long-term value rather than short-term relief. The person with options has leverage. Build options. Do not rely on one income source if you can develop another skill. Do not depend entirely on one relationship for emotional stability. Do not allow one person to become the gatekeeper of your future. The more independent your foundation becomes, the less vulnerable you are to pressure. There is also leverage in consistency. Anyone can make a promise. Few people consistently deliver. Anyone can appear confident for one conversation. Few people remain reliable for years. Reputation compounds because people begin predicting your behavior based on what you have repeatedly demonstrated. That predictability works in your favor when it is built around competence and integrity. People know you will deliver. They know you will remain calm. They know you do not make empty threats. They know that when you say no, you mean it. That reputation becomes silent leverage because people adjust their behavior before you even ask them to. Notice what happened. You did not force them. You changed the conditions. That is the difference between control and influence. Control says, "Do this because I demand it." Influence says, "The reality of the situation makes this choice logical." The second is usually more sustainable, but there is another form of leverage that requires a deeper understanding of people. Value alone is not enough if you do not understand what someone actually values. A person may say they want money, but perhaps what they really want is recognition. Someone may demand independence, but secretly fear being irrelevant. Someone may argue about a small issue because the real issue is feeling ignored. If you respond only to their words, you may miss the real mechanism underneath. To understand influence, you must learn to listen beneath the surface. And that takes us to the next lesson: psychological echo. Most people listen to respond. Strategic people listen to understand. That difference seems small, but it changes the entire way you deal with human beings. Behind what people say is often something deeper: a need, a fear, an insecurity, a desire for recognition, or simply the need to feel understood. Psychological echo begins when you learn to hear what exists beneath the words. Someone says, "I hate my job." The obvious response is to give advice: find another job, change careers, work harder. But perhaps the real problem is not the job. Maybe they feel invisible. Maybe they believe their effort is not valued. Maybe they feel trapped and uncertain about what comes next. If you answer only the sentence, you may miss the person. If you understand what produced the sentence, the conversation changes. This is psychological echo, reflecting back the meaning behind someone's words so they feel genuinely understood. People constantly reveal themselves without realizing it. The way they describe their work tells you what they value. The complaints they repeat reveal what frustrates them. The things they become defensive about reveal what they fear losing. Their ambitions reveal what they want others to recognize. You do not need to interrogate them. You need to listen. When someone complains about being overwhelmed, Listen for what sits underneath the complaint. Maybe they are carrying too much responsibility. Maybe they have extremely high standards. Maybe they are afraid of disappointing people. Instead of immediately correcting them, acknowledge the deeper experience. You seem exhausted because you're carrying more responsibility than people realize. That sentence can create more connection than 10 pieces of advice. Why? Because people have a basic psychological need to feel seen, understood, and valued. The transcript frames these as 3 silent questions people constantly ask. Do you see me? Do you understand me? Do you value me? When your communication answers those questions sincerely, people become more receptive. But there is an important distinction. Psychological echo should not mean pretending to understand someone so you can exploit their weaknesses. It should begin with genuine observation. If you discover what someone values, use that understanding to communicate more effectively, not to deliberately harm or deceive them. Suppose someone values security. You can explain a proposal through stability, predictability, and risk reduction. Someone else values freedom. The same proposal may be better understood when presented through independence and choice. The core message has not changed, only the language has changed. This connects directly to adaptive persona. Strategic communication requires you to understand that different people need different forms of explanation. You are not changing your principles. You are changing the path through which the message reaches them. In leadership, this becomes extremely valuable. A manager who understands what motivates each employee can communicate more effectively. One person may respond to responsibility. Another may respond to recognition. Another may want autonomy. Treating all 3 identically may feel fair, but it may not be effective. The same applies to sales, negotiation, parenting, and relationships. People rarely respond only to the surface content of a message. They respond to what the message means for something they care about. Learn to identify that meaning, but do not make the mistake of talking too much once you discover it. The goal is not to impress people with how well you can analyze them. The goal is to understand them well enough that your communication becomes precise. Listen for emotion. Listen for repeated themes. Listen for what they avoid saying. Listen for what suddenly makes their voice change. Sometimes the strongest information is not in the sentence. It is in the reaction. Someone who becomes unusually defensive may be protecting something important. Someone who repeatedly seeks recognition may be compensating for feeling overlooked. Someone who constantly emphasizes independence may be deeply afraid of dependence. These are not automatic conclusions. They are signals. Treat them as clues, not facts. This keeps psychological intelligence from becoming arrogance. You are observing patterns, not pretending you can read minds. And once you understand people more accurately, your influence improves naturally. You stop giving everyone the same answer. You stop arguing against the surface problem. You begin addressing the real concern. That is where communication becomes powerful. But psychological understanding creates a responsibility. Knowing what people want also means knowing what you should not do with that knowledge. There will be situations where getting what you want requires making an uncomfortable decision. There will be moments when being nice produces a worse outcome. There will be times when protecting the larger group requires disappointing one person. This is where simple ideas of good and bad become more complicated. Strategic intelligence must know how to operate in the gray without losing its moral boundaries. The real world rarely gives you decisions that are completely clean. Sometimes the choice that looks kind creates a worse outcome. Sometimes protecting the larger group requires making a decision that one person will hate. Sometimes telling someone what they want to hear is easier, but telling them the truth is more useful. Strategic intelligence begins when you stop judging decisions only by how they look and start examining what they produce. This is the idea behind ambiguous morality. It does not mean abandoning your morals. It does not mean hurting people whenever it benefits you. It does not mean becoming ruthless simply because ruthlessness looks powerful. It means understanding that complex situations cannot always be solved with simple rules. Imagine you are leading a team and discover that one employee has repeatedly lied to clients. You could give another warning because removing them feels harsh. You could tell yourself that everyone deserves another chance. But what happens to the clients? What happens to the employees who are doing their jobs honestly? What happens if the behavior continues? A difficult decision may protect more people than an easy act of kindness. That is pragmatic ethics. The question changes from what makes me look like a good person to what decision produces the best responsible outcome. That distinction matters because appearances can be deceptive. A decision can look compassionate while creating long-term damage. Another can look harsh while preventing a much larger problem. But outcome alone is not enough. Without boundaries, doing whatever works becomes an excuse for selfishness. That is why strategic thinking requires clear lines you refuse to cross. The transcript specifically emphasizes maintaining non-negotiable values while allowing yourself to be pragmatic within those boundaries. Know your lines before pressure arrives. What will you never do? What principles will remain intact even when breaking them would be convenient? What consequences are you willing to accept responsibility for? When those boundaries are clear, you gain flexibility without losing your identity. This becomes especially important in leadership. A leader who tries to make everyone happy eventually makes nobody safe. Difficult decisions are part of responsibility. Sometimes someone must be removed from a team. Sometimes a project must be cancelled. Sometimes an uncomfortable truth must be spoken because avoiding it will create a larger problem later. Being liked cannot be the highest objective. Effectiveness matters. Responsibility matters. Consequences matter. The same principle applies to personal relationships. Suppose a friend is trapped in a destructive relationship. You can remain silent because you do not want to hurt their feelings. Or you can tell them the truth, knowing they may become angry with you. Which is kinder? There is no universal answer. But strategic intelligence asks you to consider what your silence will produce, not merely how comfortable it feels in the moment. This is why context matters. An approach that works in one situation may fail completely in another. Complete disclosure may strengthen trust in a close relationship, while revealing every priority during a negotiation may unnecessarily weaken your position. A direct confrontation may solve one problem while escalating another. There is no single behavior that is always powerful. Power comes from understanding when a behavior is appropriate. That is why rigid thinking can become a weakness. If you believe you must always be honest in exactly the same way, always be nice, always confront, always forgive, or always fight, people can predict you. Strategic intelligence requires judgment, but judgment requires restraint. Do not use complexity as an excuse to justify whatever you already wanted to do. That is the trap. The phrase "the ends justify the means" can quickly become permission for selfishness if there are no ethical boundaries. A better principle is, be pragmatic about methods, be uncompromising about your core values. You can change your strategy without changing your character. You can remove someone from a position without humiliating them. You can reject a deal without destroying the other side. You can tell a difficult truth without deliberately causing pain. You can protect yourself without becoming cruel. That is the balance. The strongest strategic thinker is not the person who has no morality. It is the person who understands that morality, responsibility, context, and consequences sometimes collide and still has the discipline to make the difficult decision without abandoning their principles. Because the goal is not to look good. The goal is to create a result you can stand behind. And this leads to another principle that becomes increasingly important as your influence grows. The more capable you become, the more carefully you must control what people know about you. Not because you should live in secrecy, because information once revealed can never be completely taken back. That brings us to controlled exposure. In a world where people broadcast almost everything, privacy has become a form of strategic advantage. People reveal their opinions, plans, relationships, weaknesses, ambitions, and frustrations before anyone has earned the right to know them. They call it openness. But once information leaves you, you no longer control where it goes or how it is interpreted. Controlled exposure means understanding one simple rule. Not everyone needs the complete version of you. This is not about hiding your identity or pretending to be someone else. It is about controlling the amount of information you release and the timing of that release. Think about a new workplace. On your first week, you do not need to demonstrate every skill you possess. You do not need to reveal every plan for your career. You do not need to explain everything you know. Let your competence appear through results. Why? Because gradual discovery creates a different perception than immediate disclosure. When people see you consistently producing value, they begin to recognize that there is more to you than what they first assumed. Your capabilities become demonstrated rather than announced. The same principle applies socially. You do not tell your entire life story to everyone you meet. Trust develops over time, and information can develop with it. Access should follow trust. Someone you have known for 5 minutes does not need the same personal information as someone who has proven their loyalty for years. This becomes even more important in negotiations. Never reveal all of your priorities, constraints, and alternatives at the beginning if there is no reason to do so. Information can change the balance of a negotiation. Once the other side knows exactly what you need, they may adjust their position accordingly. You do not have to lie. You simply do not have to reveal everything. The transcript makes an important point. Information that has been revealed cannot be unrevealed. That means every disclosure should carry some level of judgment. Ask yourself, why am I sharing this? Who benefits from knowing it? What could happen if this information spreads? If you have no clear reason to reveal something, keeping it private may be the smarter decision. Timing matters too. The same information can create completely different impressions depending on when it appears. Mention a skill before anyone has seen its relevance, and it may sound like self-promotion. Demonstrate that skill when a real problem needs solving, and the same information becomes evidence of competence. The difference is timing. Strategic people understand that information has greater impact when it appears at the right moment. Your digital life requires the same discipline. Every post, comment, photograph, and public statement becomes part of the image people build of you. You may forget something you posted years ago. Other people may not. Online information can outlive the emotion that created it. That does not mean becoming paranoid about every post. It means remembering that your digital footprint is part of your reputation. If you would not want a future employer, business partner, client, or important relationship to see something, think carefully before making it permanent. Controlled exposure also protects you from being trapped inside other people's assumptions. If people know only one aspect of you, they may define you by it. If you constantly advertise one identity, they may expect you to remain that person forever. Strategic disclosure allows people to discover different sides of your capabilities over time. But there is a balance. If you reveal too little, people may struggle to trust you. Genuine relationships require openness. The objective is not maximum secrecy. It is appropriate disclosure. Your closest people should know more about you than casual acquaintances. Your business partner should know what is necessary to build the business. Your competitor does not need the same access. Different relationships require different levels of information. That is not manipulation. It is common sense. The deepest lesson is that you should stop treating information as something that simply escapes from you whenever you speak. Treat it as something you choose to release. Your words create impressions. Your disclosures create expectations. Your public behavior creates a reputation. And once those things exist, you have to live with their consequences. So reveal enough to build trust. Reveal enough to communicate. Reveal enough to create genuine connection. But keep enough private that your entire position cannot be understood from a single conversation. Privacy is not weakness. Uncontrolled exposure is. And now we reach the final lesson. Because none of these strategies matter if you become obsessed with appearing intelligent while forgetting what intelligence is supposed to produce. You can communicate perfectly, adapt to everyone, remain detached, build leverage, understand psychology, protect your information, and still accomplish nothing. The final test is brutally simple. Did it produce the result? That is where strategic intelligence becomes outcome obsession. There is a point where intelligence stops being about how much you know and becomes about what your knowledge produces. You can analyze every conversation, understand every personality, protect every piece of information, and still lose if you remain obsessed with appearing intelligent instead of creating results. Strategic thinking ultimately has one test. Did your decisions move you closer to the outcome? This is where outcome obsession begins. It means becoming less interested in winning arguments and more interested in winning the situation. Less interested in proving that you were right and more interested in making the right decision. Less interested in looking busy and more interested in producing something measurable. Imagine two people arguing over the best way to run a business. One spends hours defending his strategy. He knows the terminology, quotes experts, and wins every discussion. The other says very little, tests an approach, studies the numbers, adjusts, and eventually produces better results. Who was smarter? The second person, because intelligence without execution is only potential. The same mistake happens in everyday life. People become addicted to discussion. They research endlessly, plan endlessly, announce endlessly, and postpone the moment when reality gets to judge them. Planning feels productive because there is no risk of failure. Execution is different. Execution creates evidence. Once you act, reality tells you whether your assumptions were correct. If the strategy works, continue. If it fails, adjust. You do not need to protect your ego by pretending the original plan was perfect. Results are feedback. This mindset also changes how you handle disagreement. Suppose someone challenges your idea. Instead of immediately trying to prove them wrong, ask whether their criticism contains information that could improve the outcome. If it does, use it. If it does not, move forward. Your ego wants to win the conversation. Your strategy wants to win the objective. Choose the objective. This is one of the clearest differences between ordinary intelligence and strategic intelligence. Ordinary intelligence may focus on being correct. Strategic intelligence asks whether being correct actually changes the outcome. Sometimes you need to speak. Sometimes you need to listen. Sometimes you need to negotiate. Sometimes you need to walk away. Sometimes you need to change the plan. The correct move depends on the result you are trying to create. That is why the previous 7 lessons work together. Calculated opacity protects your information. Adaptive persona makes your communication more effective. Detachment prevents desperation from controlling your decisions. Silent leverage gives you influence without unnecessary force. Psychological echo helps you understand what people actually care about. Ambiguous morality teaches you to consider context, consequences, and responsibility. Controlled exposure protects your reputation and prevents unnecessary disclosure. And outcome obsession gives all of them a destination. Without an outcome, strategy becomes performance. You become someone who knows how to sound intelligent, but cannot translate intelligence into results. Do not become that person. Measure what matters. Did the negotiation improve? Did the relationship become healthier? Did the decision reduce the problem? Did the project move forward? Did your position become stronger? Did you create more options? Did you become less dependent? These are better questions than, did everyone agree with me? Because everyone agreeing with you is not success. A strategy that makes everyone happy but produces nothing is still a failure. A decision that makes someone temporarily unhappy but protects the long-term objective may be the better decision. This does not mean becoming obsessed with winning at any cost. The transcripts framework repeatedly emphasizes strategic intelligence within ethical boundaries. The outcome matters, but the method still matters when it affects your values, reputation, and the people you are responsible for. The goal is not ruthless behavior, it is ruthless clarity. Know what you want. Know what matters. Know what you are willing to sacrifice. Know what you will never sacrifice. Then stop wasting energy on everything else. This is where the 8 lessons become a system rather than a collection of tricks. You do not need to become mysterious. You need to become deliberate. You do not need to manipulate every person. You need to understand people accurately. You do not need to become emotionally cold. You need to become difficult to control through fear of loss. You do not need to dominate every room. You need enough leverage that your value speaks without constant pressure. You do not need to reveal everything. You need to know what information serves the objective. And you do not need to win every argument. You need to produce the result. That is what makes someone dangerously smart. Not cruelty, not deception, not the ability to manipulate everyone around them. It is the ability to observe reality without letting ego distort the decision. When others become emotional, you can remain clear. When others reveal everything, you know what to keep private. When others become desperate, you preserve alternatives. When others force, you create leverage. When others speak only about themselves, you listen for what they actually need. When others choose based on appearances, you consider consequences. When others overshare, you control exposure. And when others become obsessed with proving they are right, You remain focused on what actually works. That is the final lesson. Do not confuse looking powerful with being effective. A person can have the perfect image and terrible results. Another can remain quiet, adapt, make difficult decisions, and quietly build something that works. Choose the second, because eventually reality becomes the final judge. Not your explanations, not your intentions, not your reputation, not how intelligent you sounded. The outcome. So become more deliberate with what you reveal. Become more adaptable in how you communicate. Become less dependent on what you fear losing. Build leverage instead of demanding influence. Learn to hear what people mean beneath what they say. Think beyond simple black and white judgments while protecting your core values. Control your exposure, and above all, measure your intelligence by the quality of the results it produces. You do not need to become the most intimidating person in the room. Become the person who sees the room clearly. You do not need everyone to know your strategy. You need to know it yourself. You do not need to prove that you are smarter. Let your decisions demonstrate it. Because the most dangerous person is not the person who knows how to manipulate others. It is the person who understands people, understands himself, understands consequences, and remains disciplined enough to act according to reality instead of emotion. That person is difficult to predict, difficult to pressure, difficult to distract, and difficult to defeat. Think less about appearing powerful. Think more about becoming effective. That is how intelligence becomes strategy. That is how strategy becomes leverage. And that is how you stop merely understanding the game and start playing it with intention.